You're not from here? Where are you from? This is a No Fear podcast. We know what scares you. I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 5 of season 6. We are continuing our series about close encounters with aliens, this time with the film Under the Skin. All right, listeners, you're probably listening and can tell that we are down one co-host. Matt cannot join us for this episode, but we are talking about the movie Under the Skin. So prior to this, we've talked about several different types of close encounters with aliens. Some of them have been very broad, kind of worldwide type encounters like War of the Worlds or even 2016's Arrival. And we've talked about much more intimate ones like Fire in the Sky and The Vast of Night. I think this one kind of fits with those latter two. So we're talking about the 2013 film Under the Skin, which was directed by Jonathan Glazer. Now, he also directed the movies Birth and Sexy Beast, if you've seen those. This was actually based on a novel by Michael Faber. We have not read the novel, although after watching this, I'm very curious to read it. He did write The Crimson Petal and the White, which I have read. But this is based on the novel of the same name, which was published in 2000. And of course, it's starring Scarlett Johansson as, well, the female or the woman. She's never really named, but the main character that we follow throughout. One of the really interesting things about this film is that a lot of the extras did not know that they were being filmed in a movie until later. So in reading about kind of how Glazer went about filming this to get some semblance of authenticity, what he would do is pick up people. He would have Scarlett Johansson, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in the course of this podcast tonight. She's driving around Scotland for a good portion of this movie. She's in a van and she's driving around and she's picking up random men as she's doing it. And there were extras in this movie that didn't know that they were participating. She would pick them up in her van and there were cameras set around the van to kind of pick up things. And then later, when the scene was done, Glazer would explain to them that they were part of a movie and, you know, make sure he had their consent and everything to put their faces and their likenesses up there. But again, to kind of add that authenticity of this, a lot of the people did not know that they were acting in a movie while they were doing it. So it's a pretty, I think it's a pretty cool way of just filming a movie in general, but it adds something to this film. So I'm going to start off like we start off most of these discussions. Mel, I'd love to get some of your initial thoughts on Under the Skin.
Well, this was my first time watching this movie, and I didn't even know about this movie until you were talking about it. We were talking about topics for this particular theme of alien encounters. And so, yeah, I mean, I came to it with completely fresh eyes. I had a little bit of an idea what it was supposed to be about because I had read a little bit about it before I watched it. But I mean, I think someone could even explain to you precisely what happens in the movie. And I don't know that you would necessarily get like what it's about. There are some aspects of it that are very kind of open-ended. I mean, I think the basic gist is that, you know, Scarlett Johansson is playing a woman who is like a hidden alien who is preying on people. So basically kind of dressed as a woman, a human woman, I guess you would say, and preying on men. But one of the things that kind of struck me, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this as we go, is like just the true weirdness of the movie. There were times where I almost felt like I was watching like a kind of surreal 1970s movie. There were times where I was just like, this seems like an older movie maybe than it actually is to me, with some of like the imagery and the music and various aspects of it. It started with almost like a scene from like 2001 Space Odyssey or something. It's hard to even tell what's happening if it's like some sort of like celestial bodies moving, or maybe a ship or something. I don't know. It's just images kind of moving. It's beautiful. And you have someone that sounds like they're practicing different sounds and words, and then you're looking into a human eye. So I got the impression that maybe this was maybe the beginning of this mission or something like that. But yeah, I mean, just the way the movie is shot is very unsettling, even when there's not much going on. In an article that you put in the notes, Lisa, from the Guardian, the director talked about how he wanted to like film from an alien perspective, and I think you really get that, because I felt completely unmoored throughout the whole movie. Things were happening, and I wasn't even sure who the people were or why it was happening. Like, I'm sure we'll talk about the motorcycle people, and the way that the camera would like would have you look at everyday scenes made them seem odd and strange, almost as if you were looking at things from an alien perspective. It's hard to even describe how they did it, but everything was just slightly off or unfamiliar or uncanny, partially because of Scarlett Johansson's performance, but also just because of the way it was filmed. I mean, even her house, I think, was kind of that she would take these men to was there was definitely that kind of uncanny feel with it. And then there's, of course, outright kind of cosmic horror too. But I don't know. I feel like, I think we were talking about this before we hit record, that this may be a movie that's very hard for us even to discuss, because yeah, I mean, you're just completely kind of adrift as you watch this alien try to work their way through or prey upon humans and humankind without maybe fully understanding why. But it's definitely visually intriguing to watch. I don't know, Lisa, had you watched this movie before? Because I know you were the one who suggested that we watch it.
Yeah, I actually had not watched it before. This has been a movie that has been on my list to watch for a long time. I remember not long after it had come out, a friend of mine had called me and said, I saw this movie that I think you would really like. And it's called Under the Skin. And for some reason, I had it in my head that Scarlett Johansson played a robot in this movie. Like, I knew she was kind of a non-human entity, and so I don't know, somewhere in my brain that's where that went. And I always just kind of thought, oh, I don't know if I'm really in the mood for that. If I had known what it was, I probably would have watched it a lot earlier. And I kind of feel like I need to call up the person who recommended this movie and say thank you, because I should have watched it a lot earlier than I did. But yeah, this was my first time watching it, and I agree with everything that you were saying, especially the feeling of being unmoored while you're watching this film, because I mean, obviously I knew this was going to be an alien narrative. We're watching it as part of our Alien series, and the encounters are well, what I would consider kind of the alien abduction scenes where she takes the men back to her, whatever it is. It's not, I mean, yes, you called it a house, but it's more of like when she takes them back to the void. That's what I was thinking. I was like, it's just kind of a black void that she takes them back to. And they don't really seem to kind of comprehend what's going on until it's too late. But I just kept thinking about the other movie that we watched that really spent a lot of time dealing with alien abduction, and that was Fire in the Sky. And they're such different scenes, because Fire in the Sky, the abduction scene, is so in your face. It's so visceral. It's terrifying. It's like every sense is being triggered when you're watching it, because this is hard to explain if you haven't seen the movie, but it feels like a very tactile scene in Fire in the Sky. Like, everything seems to have a texture to it, a very unpleasant texture, I might add. There are these sounds that are uncomfortable, and sights that are uncomfortable, and in this it's the complete opposite. It's the absence of anything sensual. So there's nothing really to see except black, nothing. The sounds are very dissonant. There are a couple of articles floating out there talking about the sound design of this movie and what the composer went through to get this like perfect score. And by the way, the score won several awards for this film. So, I mean, that's well worth, I think, looking up for our listeners if that's something that interests you. But just talking about the different types of experimentation that the composer did with different musical instruments, trying to get this beautiful yet haunting yet very uncomfortable sound. That's really the only way I can describe it, is it was uncomfortable to listen to. But when she takes them back to the void, it's scary in a kind of cosmic horror way. But then you would compare that to when she was walking through, I mean, basically humanity. So, Mel, you mentioned the opening scene, which does feel like almost like a 70s sci-fi, where you don't really know what you're looking at, if it's like a space station or kind of what's happening, but you get the sense that it's other. And when you're watching her change clothes before she goes out, but then she goes out and very quickly she's in like a shopping mall type situation where she goes and buys clothes and buys makeup and kind of does everything to make herself appealing and look like a human woman. But I found that scene where she first enters the shopping mall to be very unsettling. Just kind of moving from that quiet space where she was getting ready, and then all of a sudden, it almost felt overwhelming to be in a shopping mall. There was so many people and so much noise, and it was like this cacophony. And I noticed that when you're watching that, you're seeing things that are very familiar sights, but that felt very unfamiliar the way it was being shown. And I really appreciate that in this movie, the way you can see things from, I don't know, we're just going to have to call her, I think, the female throughout, because she's not really given a name. But when you see, because you're seeing things purely through the female's perspective, really. And you do feel like a foreigner in every sense of the word, which was really, I think, unique to watch.
I agree. And I mean, not to belabor the beginning of the film too much, though, I love that you pointed out the kind of quietness from her getting dressed initially to the bustle of the shopping mall, and then later when she's walking on the street and looking at everybody. Of course, you also have her identity crisis that starts to happen partway through the movie as well, which makes everything even harder to understand. But just the beginning of this movie, after the what feels like the 70s sci-fi movie, as you pointed out, we have the person on the motorcycle with this like buzzing bee music playing that like really just kind of grates on you, who goes in the woods, picks up a body of a dead woman, throws that body in the van. And then I thought maybe they were still in the van at first. It's very hard to even tell where you are, but I guess they went back to her void house or something, but everything is white. And I mean, I don't know about you, Lisa, but the woman who was like dead, well, maybe was dead, I don't know, because she was like crying. They rip her clothes off as the female puts those clothes on. It looked like her. And I wondered if it was like a past version of her. And that idea kind of, I don't know. It's interesting how, even though the film is filmed literally from like a quote unquote alien perspective, and this person, the female, is a hunter and a predator, during the movie, I felt like I was feeling some empathy for this person when they started going through their crisis. But it was almost like there was like a tinge of, I don't know, that beginning when you realize that she's pulling clothes off herself and putting them on is just very disturbing to me, like the uncanny. And yeah, it's kind of foreboding because it's like, has this failed before? Like, what's going on? And the motorcycle rider, who's never explained, maybe they're the enabler, the person controlling them, I don't know, but they're very ominous, constantly checking on her, controlling her. And then when she goes rogue and decides she doesn't want to hurt people, that the motorcycle guy goes and gets the person and kills them and then goes off like looking for her. So there was so much going on in the background, even when the movie starts in the middle of it, that that's never explained to us, that I felt like was affecting how I was responding to the movie, even though I was totally confused and still don't understand precisely how all that was connected.
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of those films that's definitely going to benefit from multiple viewings, because I will fully admit I probably missed a lot when I was watching it this first time, because yeah, it is a very disorienting movie. And that opening scene, I mean, really, you're kind of bookended with the same scene, although it in a very different tone and a very different light, in the beginning and the end. And we won't talk about the end right now. Because in the beginning you do have her essentially undressing herself in a very kind of cold and calculating manner. But the whole idea behind it is that there are these aliens. We don't really know where they're from or why they're here. They are like these completely black figures. Like, that's really, I wouldn't know how else to describe them. I mean, they are just these, like, almost like a gray alien, but imagine it just completely inky midnight black. And much more humanoid, I think, even than like a gray alien. And so they wear these like human suits to interact with humanity, which I guess is for the purpose of collecting specimens and learning about what's happening on the planet, from the best I can tell. You're right in saying that there's kind of a whole mission that's going on that we don't really know about. And part of that is a language barrier. You know, you mentioned that the movie starts with her repeating sounds, which I can only guess is her learning to speak our language. So they don't even like communicate in the same way. So we don't know really what their mission is. But it's very both kind of beautiful and unsettling and creepy when the few times that you see her not in her suit, her like human suit, because it doesn't just become a thing that she like takes off. It's still has some sort of life in it. You mentioned it blinking, like the suit will blink at her if she's like holding it. I I hope I'm explaining this well for listeners who have not watched the movie. You really need to just hit pause and go watch this, because it's really kind of incredible. But that's another thing that I think I was really intrigued by the whole time, is I almost wonder if her identity crisis was because she was becoming a little bit human as the movie progressed. Because in the beginning something really terrible happens, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. It's the scene on the beach, which is one of the hardest ones for me to watch in this whole movie. But we see her as being in that scene very alien. Like, she doesn't have human emotions at that point. But then later on, like, you see her examining blood, for instance, and you see her we get the sense that she's feeling things. I'm thinking specifically of the man she meets when she's out after she leaves the van in the fog. And there's kind of a little mini love story almost that happens. And so it's not just an alien wearing a human suit, but it's almost like she's sort of, I don't know, starts to take on human aspects, which I think becomes problematic for her later. I don't know if I'm making sense with any of this. Does that make sense to you, Mel, since you've seen the movie?
As much sense as anything. I guess. No, it makes sense. Yeah, the scene on the beach, which I guess we could probably just go ahead and talk about, is when she finds the man who is from another country and he's just camping. One of the things is like when she is cruising around in her van, which apparently Scarlett Johansson would learn how to drive the van, drove it, and would drive like wherever she pleased, kind of. So it really is like rambling around asking people for directions. But she would ask these leading questions to see if the man was alone and various other things. And, obviously we know after her first time taking someone to the void and them, being held in stasis until we find out they later die, she is kind of like she is asking her leading questions and finds out this guy is like from another country and he's visiting Scotland and he has a tent and he's completely alone and nobody knows he's there and he's just going around wherever the wind. So I mean, you're like, oh, poor guy. And you're right. It's there's many moments where she plays this idea of not being human very well. I can see how you would think almost that she could be playing a robot. You have the baby on the beach with the parents, the family's dog gets caught in a riptide and is getting pulled out and going to die. And the woman tries to save the dog and then she gets caught and she's going to die. And the husband is trying to save the wife and the dog and then just the wife. And they just leave the baby on the beach alone screaming. And the swimmer guy is about to get taken by Scarlett Johansson when he decides he's going to try to save if he can, and he saves the husband, but the husband goes back out. It is difficult to watch. It's pretty horrible. And so the baby's left alone. And she basically is like, oh, well, I'm just going to get this swimmer guy because that's what I came here for. And so she knocks him on the head with a rock and like drags him away while the baby's screaming. And then later the motorcycle guy comes because after she takes people, the motorcycle guy goes to their life and cleans it up. So there's no evidence, no obvious evidence. And he doesn't do anything about the baby. And then we find out later, I think, that the baby's missing. I mean, it's just really disturbing and horrifying. And when she listens to the radio report about it, she shows no emotion. It's so creepy and weird. But yeah, like you said, as the movie goes on, particularly when she sees her reflection in the void and in mirrors, it's almost like she starts to like forget she's an alien. She starts to have empathy, it seems like, a little bit. Which going from like leaving a baby to die to like not killing someone to void is kind of a big change, I guess, when you look at it that way. But there's also this really freaky alien moments when she kind of tries to be a person and she can't. Like, for instance, her like body parts don't work like regular people body parts because she's just supposed to lure them in to the home and kill them or whatever. There's no purpose for her to like have a relationship, emotional or physical, with a human being. She can't eat even though she wants to, and she tries to eat the cake and she can't. Like, it's very disturbing when she starts to have this crisis of who she is because she's violated whatever it is she's supposed to be doing for the aliens, and so she can't really go back to them. But at the same time, she's not really whoever this woman, if this woman was a woman at some point and they're like using her to hide themselves or whatever's going on, she's not that person either. And I think you're right when you reference the moment when when we see what the alien is, and the alien is looking at the face of the human that she was and still blinking. Like, it's just so disturbing because I don't know, like I almost feel bad for this person who's in crisis, even though in my mind I know this like an invading alien. Of course, we don't know anybody's motivations for anything in this movie, so it's really difficult to know like who we should even be trying to identify with.
Yeah, I mean, the whole movie does have that kind of remove to it that you're discussing. Like we don't really have people that we can identify with because we're not even with, if you want to call them her victims, the men that she lures into the void, we're not even with them for long enough to really get a sense. Like, it's not like you're watching a serial killer movie, where you're seeing the horror from it, from, here's this woman and she's luring them in and she's killing them, and we don't even see that. I've never really watched a movie that was able to do this. Like, I was even thinking there's a lot of nudity in this film, more than I was even like anticipating. And it's not something that really bothers me in film. But one thing that struck me when I was watching this is, I mean, you see the men without their clothes several times, especially when they're going into the void, because she's like seducing them, and so they follow her and they're taking off their clothes. and then they just kind of sink down into like this quicksand of blackness, of like nothingness. I don't know what it is. They're suspended in the void. But there are several scenes where Scarlett Johansson herself is completely nude, and where she's examining herself, like you're talking about, where she's examining herself in the mirror and she's really kind of seeing her human form. I think really for the first time, she's kind of taking it in and trying to understand what it is, and probably what it is that lures the men in about her. But this is what really got me, is I was like, Scarlett Johansson, she's an actress that, if you were talking to me about who are like really attractive, sexy actresses, like she'd be at the top of the list. And yet every scene in this completely cuts out any sense of like desire. And even when you see like her nude scenes in the movie, they feel completely devoid of emotion, even as a viewer watching it. And I was really struck by that. And I know we're probably going to repeat ourselves a million times during the course of this episode, but that just the alienness of it all was really breathtaking to watch. That being said, just because I mentioned it, the void itself is also terrifying, because where there's this scene where you actually see two of her men that she's lured in, and they're extended in, and they see each other, and you realize that there's some sort of like awareness that is going on. So they're not dead, but they're not alive. They're kind of suspended, and they see each other, and one of them reaches out to touch the other one, and he kind of like implodes. It's That to me was one of the closest things to like true terror and horror, besides the scene on the beach, because I had a really hard time watching that screaming baby and knowing that nothing good was going to happen there. But that scene in the void was the closest thing I saw to like true horror in this. It again, it had that, and I keep comparing it to the other movie that we talked about, Fire in the Sky, in the sense that when we talked about that scene, that one of the most terrifying things was that there was a real sense that the aliens don't care in the way we care, that there is that kind of like lack of empathy, that it's purely clinical, and that's what makes it so terrifying, that there's no escape. And this had that same feeling to it as well. It was executed very differently, but to the same end, I felt like, which I don't know, that's really, I think, something interesting to explore when you're looking at these alien narratives.
Yeah, I agree. I like the use of the word clinical. There's almost like a functional, I don't know, it is weird. I think you're right to point out that, there is a lot of nudity in the film, but it doesn't, yeah, it kind of neutralizes desire. I mean, even when she's drawing the men into her, whatever it is, void house, they're looking at her, they're like objectifying her because they're looking at her and she's drawing them in, but they end up in the void. But there's no reciprocity. Like even when she's walking around on the top of the void, I don't know. Yeah, it's very alien. There's this distance there that I think is kind of like off-putting. When she's examining her body in the mirror, it's very functional. I mean, she's like, oh, look, my hand is moving, or this finger moves, or like looking at herself in very like, yeah, a clinical or functional manner, which I think kind of neutralizes what we typically think of when we think of nudity in a film, or particularly with maybe an actress like Scarlett Johansson. And also like when she's luring the men, she doesn't even fully understand why they're coming with her, which I thought was interesting too. And that also seems alien and weird while you're watching it. Because like, even though we don't know anything about these men, we're kind of like, well, this seems dangerous. If something terrible is going to happen here. Of course, we don't know very much about them. It's just a series of people she takes in. But she, even as she starts to approach her identity crisis, starts almost like asking or being intrigued by what they think is attractive about her. Like she's not doing a whole lot to attract them because she doesn't understand how attraction works really. I mean, she does and she doesn't, but you can tell that she's like learning the whole time, but that there's just certain things she doesn't comprehend. And I wonder if that also creates the remove as well, because it's, yeah, I mean, it's just very much like, it's like an observation and not any sort of like relational issue. Does that make sense?
It does. This is a film that completely is about the male gaze and yet escapes the male gaze.
Yeah, and like creates a new type of I don't even know how to articulate what it does with it. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, well, I mean, it creates an alien gaze, is what it does.
Mm-hmm.
Which this is a movie, and this is why I think it's difficult to talk about it. It is a movie that is entirely made from the alien's perspective, truly. And you're right. She lures in these men, but she doesn't really have a sense of how it's happening, because we first see her out in the world in that shopping mall, and she watches everybody else to kind of figure out where she needs to go. So the fact that she like picks up a red lipstick or a certain type of jacket, it's because she's watching other people, and then she just gets around and drives and picks up picks up lonely men. And I don't know, it was really kind of fascinating, because I think the scene where you really see where she starts to understand what men are intrigued by, because she doesn't even have to almost say much other than she asks questions. She'll, where are you from? Where are you going? Do you live alone? Why? Do you have a girlfriend? Why not? Do you, and she is trying to figure out if they're alone or if they'll have somebody who will kind of come looking for them. So there's a sense that people have probably, I guess maybe the other aliens have prepped her for, things to look out for, but she doesn't understand really, I think, why they're drawn in by her. And it's not until she meets the man, she meets this one man who has, like, he basically has these like facial deformities, and it's a really touching, I think, conversation that they have, because he's walking along the road at night, he's going to the grocery store, and he says that he has to shop at night basically because people are mean. I can't remember his exact line, but it was a good one. I wish I had written it down. And that was one of the only scenes, this is where I found it so fascinating, where she says, "Do you want to touch me?" And she lets him like touch her face, and then she's like, "Do you want to touch my neck? Do you want to touch my hand?" And he does, and it's like, it's almost like that was the first time she, I think, truly understood that desire, and that not only the desire for her, but that just desire for human connection that other humans will have, because it's something that he has been missing in his life, that he talks about. And that's also the character who she ends up letting go. Of course, he's not really let go, because the mysterious motorcycle man, who I'm guessing is another alien, part of her mission or whatever, that's following her, picks him up. But I don't know, I thought that was a really interesting turning point in the film, both for her as a character and kind of learning what it means to be human, but just, I don't know, I've been pondering like the title for a while, this idea of under the skin. And obviously the idea here is that under her skin is an alien, is something not human. But at that point in the film, she seems more human than other times. And of course, that comes right before she, I think you mentioned, where she tries to like eat the cake, and she tries to have some sort of romantic relationship, or even like just a personal relationship too with the other man, who helped her out, that she meets. Where does she meet? She meets him on a bus, and he kind of takes her in and helps her. So yeah, I don't know, that was just, I thought, a really interesting turn from the point of story.
Yeah, it's interesting too because she as being an alien, she probably doesn't quite understand what it is about her appearance, like you were saying, that is attracting these men to her. And it's that moment when she's with that guy who has the tumors on his face, I guess, and hears him talk about his life. And it's interesting that she starts to open up at that point. And yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. It's an interesting kind of idea about like appearances versus, I guess, like reality and the judgments that we make based on our expectations, or like our societal or cultural distinctions about, physical attractiveness, I suppose. And she's learning about all, even though she's this woman who's picking people up at clubs and whatnot, she's actually an alien underneath, and she's learning about this from these discussions. It's also interesting that when she takes him to the void before she lets him go, she has that weird like break where she looks down in the void where she typically is looking at them when they're under, and instead she sees herself as the alien, then herself as the female human, and then herself as the alien again. It's really kind of jolting. At first I was like, is she remembering the ant? Because there's these ants and flies throughout the movie too, which I'm not sure what they're uh, symbolizing. But I got the impression it was her kind of starting to have that break where she's like seeing who she is, but also like, I'm also this other person, like almost these like two kind of identities. And I don't know, it's an interesting point in the movie for that to start to happen. And it also makes me wonder if that's part of the reason why she had to take over from the first woman who looked very much like her. Is this something that's been happening to these aliens for a while, that they like become corrupted in their mission because they start feeling empathy? And like, what does that mean? Because then you have questions about empathy, even, because I mean the movie does such a great job of making us look at things from an alien perspective, only to have the alien then have an identity crisis and have empathy. I mean, that makes it more complicated and also kind of doesn't at the same time. I don't know, I'm making my head hurt right now.
Yeah, it is kind of one of those movies that, I mean, because I think it forces you to ask the question when you're looking at a movie like this that is from an alien perspective, and like the movie is asking you to step into this alien point of view. So it does make you ask the question of, okay, if this is alien, then what is human? Right? And it seems to me that, everything you're saying is correct, and that there's something in the empathy and in the emotional connection that humans form with each other that makes us human. Like, that's the thing that makes us human. But then the movie also posits that that's a dangerous thing for her, which seems not right. But then again, I'm a human, so I guess it would to me. It's, yeah, because she absolutely, and I think that's the scene on the beach. That was the thing that made it so hard for me, is to think, how does she not pick up that baby that's crying, or show any emotion when she hears later what happened to it? That, the father did drown and the mother and the baby are missing. So we can only assume that they drowned as well, and they just haven't found the bodies. But the fact that she will show no emotion with that. But then later, it does seem that she's beginning to experience that. And yeah, I do find it interesting too that the turning points, I mean, really, it's a couple of turning points. It's the turning points with the man that she lets go, and then the turning points with the man who kind of takes her in, and they have their little love affair or whatever is happening. I find it interesting that in both of those situations, the moment of crisis, I don't know if that's the right word, but the turning point for her in both of those scenes is where she examines herself. She's looking at first herself in the void. She sees her reflection as both human and alien. Then later she looks at herself in the mirror. And then after she begins to sleep with the man in the, I don't know, what is it, like a castle that they go visit, that she immediately stops and like examines her body. And I find that really interesting too, that the film kind of positions her change as like a self-examination, which I guess is to signal that she's changing a bit. And then again, that's what puts her in danger at the end too, which we're probably going to have to talk about at some point, because that was one of my other least favorite parts of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it shows that she's changing. I think it also shows that she just doesn't know herself anymore. Like, she doesn't quite seem to understand or want to complete her alien mission, but she doesn't understand who she could be as a human. And that's really sad too, because I feel like she just kind of falls in this in-between place and has no chance to figure it out because, of course, humans are going to kill something that's scary looking or other. Yeah, I mean, we should probably talk about the end. I mean, basically, the tables are kind of turned on her, unfortunately, because she runs off, and once she realizes, I mean, it's kind of unclear as to whether, I don't know, she basically leaves the guy who took her to the castle and goes off in the woods to, I guess, be by herself for existential crisis, and meets like a logger, a lumberjack or whatever, who asks her, she's a woman alone now. And I guess she doesn't understand this because she hasn't understood, her role as a woman thus far in the movie, really, because she was the hunter. She runs into this man who asks her a bunch of leading questions to figure out if she's alone. And then, I mean, basically attacks her when she is resting at like a trail walker rest area. And yeah, I agree with you, Lisa. It was very difficult to watch that end. The movie just kind of took a turn, I thought, from like surrealism to just really directed violence.
Yeah. So apparently, now, listeners, I mentioned that I have not read the book. Mel, you have not read the book. But I did look it up just to I wanted to know what the differences, like how close of an adaptation this really was. And apparently this is a really different adaptation. Down to, I mean, the book is about an alien coming down, or a group of aliens, and you see from the alien perspective. So that still stays the same. I think the aliens look different. I think their mission in the book is much more clear than in the movie, like what they're actually doing. And then the ending is much different. Like this whole out in the forest meeting this lumberjack character, it doesn't happen. I think, if I remember right, in the book, it said that she dies in a car accident.
Yeah, she starts to like have the empathy and the identity crisis thing, but it's like an accident, I think.
Like she's out kind of driving her car and ends up in a car accident, and that's the end of her. So I thought it was really interesting that this film decided to kind of take such a, I don't know, so it's just such a big shift in subject matter here, because obviously introducing this idea of violence against women and her assault and her murder. I mean, it's not an accident, it's murder in the movie. I was kind of puzzling over what that meant. And this is not anything I came up with. This is from an article that came out, I think, I don't know exactly where it came out. It is somewhere online in the Mary Sue, I think, where it kind of talks about how in the world of Under the Skin, the female, in not understanding human dynamic, in living this alien point of view, is going out in the world in a way that a woman really would never do that. Um, I don't know any woman who would feel comfortable driving a van around Scotland and just picking up random men. Yeah, I think I mentioned before that that sounds like the plot of like a serial killer movie. It just it's something that I think women would be afraid to do. Women would be afraid to pick up random men and take them back home because we're taught that that's dangerous and for good reason. She is of course the one in danger, and that works to her advantage because men typically don't see a beautiful woman as a danger to them. You know, if they meet a beautiful woman in a club, like happens that happens in a scene in this film, you know, they're thinking it's their lucky day that they get to follow her home, and it's not seen as like a dangerous thing. But I think for women, women view the world much differently because we are very aware of the threats that are out there and that the violence that can happen, and we have to be careful, just to kind of put it bluntly. But in this, she's the threat, but she also doesn't fully understand the threat that she's under just being a human woman, like, and so it's not until the very end, which is kind of sad, that we've talked about like the twist and turns she's taken and how she's beginning to kind of have this like alien identity crisis because she's feeling more human, or she's identifying more with this like humanness that she's been exploring, only then to kind of truly understand what it means to be a human female. And that is, if you're out alone and you meet a man, he could take advantage of that. And in this case, he does. And she wakes up in a very terrible scene to being assaulted by this man, only to run off. And when she does, that's when he kind of discovers, because I think part of her like suit in the back gets ripped and he can see what's under her skin. He can see the alien part. And that's when he flips out and ends up going back to get the gasoline and burn her. I mean, it's terrible, but it's also kind of even more terrible when you think about, just again, is that what it means to be human? We've talked about it means to, before, what it meant to be human was to have empathy and was to have like a desire to connect with other humans. But then is this also what it means to be human? Meaning you're going to take advantage of people in vulnerable situations, and your first instinct is going to be kill something that looks different. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, those are two vastly different things, but is that what it means to be human? It's really
Yeah,
kind of one of those things that it's uncomfortable to think about.
yeah, I agree. I was thinking the same thing after the end of the movie. I was like, I agree with what you're saying. That, yeah, I mean, as a woman, when she went off into the woods alone, like, I'm gonna walk on these trails completely alone, I was like, I don't know about that. And I kind of recoiled when she ran into the guy and he was asking her the questions. And I was thinking to myself, maybe you should answer them differently. But she has no concept. I mean, at that point, she is completely confused and doesn't know what's going on. And so a lot of her gaps are more answers than her saying anything. And then when she decides to be in the rest area or whatever you want to call it alone, um, yeah, I'm thinking these are all terrible decisions. Just like I was thinking that the guys were probably making terrible decisions when they were getting in her van. I wouldn't do that either. And I think you're right. I mean, as a woman walking through the world, we're thinking about way different things that she doesn't comprehend. The whole movie, she's just trying to understand human behavior. And it is kind of scary that it's like a spectrum. Like, she's preying on humans, but seems to be messing up her mission because she starts to have identity crises and feel for humans and want to be human. But her last experience with a human is one attacking her because she appears like a human female, a woman. And like that's the scene where she's looking at, the alien is looking at Scarlett Johansson's head, and Scarlett Johansson's eyes are blinking, which makes you wonder where these suits are coming from. And or are we seeing it still from the alien's perspective, and that's not actually happening? It's still kind of surreal. And then the guy comes and, like you said, destroys the thing that he thinks is different or scary. Like, oh, this is an alien. Oh my God, I'm going to burn this up with gasoline, which, I mean, I don't even want to think about what his anyway. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I was so disturbed by the end of the movie, and my mind was going in all sorts of different directions, because it's like you watch the whole movie completely confused and unmoored about this person who is completely confused and unmoored, and like her mission was to victimize people, I don't know, for food or whatever. It's never explained. But then in the end, it's a human preying upon her when she's vulnerable, and then knee jerk destroying her when he sees she's an alien. And I mean, I guess in a way, when she's burned, she kind of becomes part of the earth again, and she's like, she and the human part of her. And of course, the end is the motorcycle guy looking for her, I guess, so he can decide if he needs a new alien partner to keep preying on people. But I don't know. It's very bleak, and it's very disturbing. And I think it makes a viewer think about all sorts of things that we either don't typically want to think about, or like we don't think about it because we just don't question it, if that makes sense. But when you look at it from a different perspective, it kind of makes you aware of all these different things by seeing it from that alien perspective.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think just the perspective shift changes it, because I mean, she obviously is not, like, whatever the aliens are doing is not okay, because they are killing these men. I agree. I don't know what they're using them for. There's some sense that they're getting the blood. They're doing something, because you see after the guy like implodes in the void, you see like this almost like a river of blood. I assumed that's what it was. Going
I did too.
somewhere.
Yeah.
But at the same time, because you're seeing it from her perspective, there's no emotion attached to it, so it doesn't feel as wrong. And I think if we had seen like that last scene, if we were watching it from the human's perspective, where like somebody was investigating their friends going missing, and they know that there's this alien being that's doing it, and then they meet the alien being in the woods and fought it and then killed it, that would be the triumphant ending, right? Like, oh, I got the thing that was out there killing my friends. But the way this movie presents it, because of the journey we've been on and because of the point of view we've come from, it doesn't feel that way. It feels very disturbing and very bleak. I think those are good descriptors of it. I don't know. I definitely want to watch the film again. I think I did miss a lot. I want to know what the motorcycle dude is doing, what his goal is. And I want to know, too, if the aliens understand gender in the way we do. Just given that the motorcycle, I'm assuming, was a man, but it's also like a suit he's wearing. So he may not be. Like, aliens may not have that concept. I don't know. But I'm curious to read the book too, just to find out more, even though I know they're really different. I would like to find out more. Well, we may end up actually getting to know more about this character and maybe more about the aliens. I would hope. There are some news reports. Now, these, I will say, the news reports that I found came out last year in 2020. So I don't know what's happening with this now, but I do know that there are plans for there to be an Under the Skin TV series that I think it was a company called Silver Reel that got the rights from it. And so from everything I've heard, they plan to adapt the novel into a TV show, but they also want to like pay respect to the movie. So they bought the rights to the book, in other words. to adapt that to a television show, but they also want to acknowledge that the movie happened. And so the movie is going to play a big part, I think, in how the TV show is filmed, if it gets filmed at all. So I don't really know too much. I think A24, which was the distributor for this film, actually tried to get the rights to do the TV show, and there ended up being a big bidding war, and Silver Reel outbid them, which I think is kind of interesting that they beat out A24 for this. So, like I said, I don't know if this is still happening. I don't know. I'm hoping this is not one of the projects that kind of fizzled away because of everything that happened in 2020 and 2021. But it could be that we're going to get an Under the Skin TV show. And I would really, really kind of be curious to see what comes of that. And hopefully more of these questions will be answered, because I don't know, I would like to spend a little bit more time in this universe and kind of find out what's going on and what these aliens want and why they're here. So I don't know, it could be really interesting. Well, I guess that's a good place to call this discussion today. Like I said, Under the Skin is one of those movies I'm going to think about a lot now that I've seen it. I definitely want to rewatch it a time or two to see what I missed. But if you've listeners, if you have watched this and have thoughts, we would love to hear that. As we always say, you can reach out to us. We are across social media at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram. We also have a Facebook page where occasionally people will comment, and we would love to hear your thoughts. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon and get access to exclusive content. Or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free, but it does help other listeners find us. Theme music is by Nicholas Gasparini. Thanks for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.